75,000 beds, one prison, zero mercy. In 2023, El Salvador opened the largest prison in the Americas. It was built for one reason only: to hold the people the president calls terrorists, gangsters, murderers, or just anyone the government doesn't like. A concrete fortress, surrounded by barbed wire, cells with no beds, no windows, no contact with the outside world. Tens of thousands will live here, forever. This isn't just a prison. It's the symbol of a new El Salvador. For decades, the country was a battlefield, not between armies, but between gangs, police, and ordinary civilians caught in the middle. MS-13, Barrio 18, two of the world's deadliest gangs. They controlled neighborhoods, schools, even hospitals. Children were recruited before they learned to read. Murder was routine. The police had no control. The state was collapsing. Then came one man, Nayib Bukele. Young, popular, uncompromising. He declared total war on gangs, imposed a state of emergency, and arrested over 80,000 people, without warrants, without trials. Suddenly, the streets went quiet. Killings stopped. El Salvador became the safest it's been in decades. But at what cost? This is the story of a country that traded chaos for control, and of a president hailed as a savior by some, and a dictator by others. To understand how El Salvador became safe, you first have to understand how it became dangerous. It didn't happen overnight. This wasn't just poverty. It wasn't just drugs. It was history. In the 1980s, El Salvador was engulfed in a brutal civil war. 12 years of government death squads, leftist guerrilla rebels, and U.S. military involvement tore the country apart. By the time the war ended in 1992, more than 75,000 people were dead. Entire communities were displaced. Trust in government was gone. What remained was a nation traumatized and desperate. That's when the gangs came. But they didn't come from within. They came from Los Angeles. During and after the war, hundreds of thousands of Salvadorans fled to the United States, many settling in Southern California. There, their children faced racism, poverty, and violence in American schools and streets. To protect themselves, some formed gangs, most famously MS-13 and Barrio 18. These weren't just local street crews. They grew into transnational organizations, operating across borders. And in the 1990s and 2000s, the U.S. began deporting tens of thousands of these gang members back to Central America. They returned to El Salvador, hardened, organized, and armed. The country they came back to had no infrastructure to stop them, no functioning police, no community resilience. So the gangs filled the vacuum. They built their own rule of law, one based on fear, violence, and total control. They extorted local businesses, murdered rivals, and ruled entire neighborhoods. Children were recruited young. Teenagers were expected to kill to prove loyalty. Families were torn apart. By 2015, the numbers were staggering. That year, El Salvador had over 6,600 murders, in a country of just 6 million people. That's more than 18 murders per day. Entire neighborhoods became no-go zones. Some people lived their whole lives on one street, too afraid to cross into another gang's territory. Public buses were burned. Drivers who refused to pay protection were executed. Even funeral homes had to pay extortion fees to operate. Meanwhile, the government was paralyzed. Corruption was rampant. Efforts to negotiate with gangs only made things worse, and for the average Salvadoran, daily life became a survival game. You didn't live, you endured. This was the reality Bukele promised to end, not with reforms, not with dialogue, but with force. And in 2019, he got his chance. Before Bukele's rise, life in El Salvador wasn't just dangerous. It was dominated by danger. Entire communities lived under the control of gangs. The police didn't go there. The government had no power there. It was like living under a second government, one with guns, tattoos, and no mercy. People paid two taxes, one to the state and one to the gang that controlled their neighborhood. The second tax was non-negotiable. If you were a bus driver, a shopkeeper, a farmer, or just a parent walking your child to school, you paid. If you didn't, you disappeared. Everyday decisions were calculated for survival. Which street to walk, which shoes to wear, what time to come home. Wearing the wrong color could get you killed. Looking someone in the eye could mark you for death. Young boys were forced to join. Young girls were forced to serve. And if you tried to leave the gang, or even refused to join, your whole family could pay the price. Children learned to hide when they heard gunshots. Teenagers carried weapons instead of backpacks. Many parents sent their kids away, north, toward the U.S., because it was safer to risk a desert crossing than to stay. For most people, trust was gone. You couldn't trust the police. They might be working with the gangs. You couldn't trust your neighbor. They might be informing. You couldn't trust the government. They weren't doing anything. This wasn't just about violence. It was about hopelessness, the kind of hopelessness that makes entire generations flee. That turns a nation into an emigration machine that fuels caravans, border crises, and refugee camps. By 2018, over 1 in 5 Salvadorans was living abroad. Those who remained lived in a state of quiet terror. And then came a man who promised to change everything. Young, charismatic, always online. His name was Nayib Bukele, and he promised not to negotiate with gangs, but to destroy them. In 2019, El Salvador did something radical. It elected a 37-year-old president, young, media-savvy, and entirely outside the traditional two-party system, Nayib Bukele. He wasn't a military strongman. He didn't come from one of the oligarchic families. He wasn't part of the old left or right. He was different. On the campaign trail, he promised what every Salvadoran had been hoping for: security, stability, a future. But his approach was something new. He called himself the coolest president in the world. He wore leather jackets and backwards baseball caps. He tweeted memes and posted from an iPad in cabinet meetings. His fans didn't see a politician. They saw a tech CEO running a country like a startup. And Bukele had one key product to sell: order. He blamed the traditional parties for decades of corruption and bloodshed. He promised no more negotiations with gangs, no more deals behind closed doors, no more excuses. If elected, he said he would make El Salvador safe, once and for all. People believed him. In a country where murder was part of the national routine, Bukele didn't just offer policies, he offered hope, and he delivered quickly. Within months of taking office, Bukele deployed thousands of soldiers across the country. He launched the Territorial Control Plan, a military-style strategy to retake gang-held zones. Roadblocks, armed patrols, heavy surveillance. For the first time in years, gangs began to retreat, at least in public. Critics argued it was all for show, that Bukele was secretly cutting deals with gang leaders to reduce violence in exchange for better prison conditions. Investigative journalists published leaked documents. U.S. officials took notice, but most Salvadorans didn't care. Violence was dropping, and Bukele's popularity kept rising. By 2021, he controlled not just the presidency, but the National Assembly, the judiciary, and the military. He replaced judges, fired prosecutors, changed the rules. To his critics, it looked like the death of democracy. To his supporters, it looked like results. And then, in March 2022, everything escalated. The trigger wasn't gradual. It was sudden, violent, and unforgettable. On the weekend of March 25th to 27th, 2022, gangs across El Salvador launched what appeared to be a coordinated killing spree. They murdered 87 people in just 72 hours. In restaurants, on buses, in broad daylight. It was the deadliest spike in years, and the country had seen enough. President Bukele reacted immediately. He didn't give a speech. He didn't ask for permission. Instead, he declared war. Within hours, the National Assembly passed an emergency decree, suspending constitutional protections. No need for arrest warrants, no trial guarantees, no limits on pre-trial detention. Police could now arrest anyone, based on suspicion alone. And they did. Within weeks, tens of thousands of people were detained. Young men with tattoos, former gang members, people accused by neighbors, and according to human rights groups, plenty of innocent people too. The government gave law enforcement one mission: arrest everyone suspected of gang affiliation. No exceptions. Bukele posted videos of prisoners being stripped, lined up, humiliated. He tweeted graphs showing plummeting murder rates. He mocked international critics. He celebrated each new day without a homicide. And the numbers were staggering. By the end of 2022, over 60,000 people had been arrested. In 2023, that number passed 75,000. To handle the influx, Bukele built a prison the size of a city. The Terrorism Confinement Center. Located in Tecoluca, it's one of the largest prisons in the world. Designed to hold 40,000 inmates with no recreational facilities, no contact with the outside world, no lawyers. Just cold concrete, iron bars, and round-the-clock surveillance. No one gets out. No one gets visits. No one gets rights. It was a fortress and a message. Bukele called it a hotel for terrorists. Critics called it a violation of human rights on an industrial scale. But most Salvadorans didn't care. For the first time in decades, they could walk outside without fear. And that mattered more than any international report. Just outside the city of Tecoluca, in the heart of El Salvador, lies something unprecedented. A prison the size of a small town, built in record time, designed to lock away tens of thousands of people indefinitely. It's called the Terrorism Confinement Center, or CECOT. From the outside, it looks like a military base. From the inside, it looks like the end of freedom. Massive concrete walls, towers with armed guards, rows of steel doors, barbed wire everywhere, watchtowers on every corner. Inside, there are 8 buildings, each with dozens of windowless cells. No beds, only slabs of concrete to sleep on. No personal items, no family visits, no phone calls, no lawyers. Prisoners are locked inside 24/7, under constant surveillance. Lights stay on all night. Meals are thrown in through metal slots. Each cell can hold up to 100 men, packed together, shoulder to shoulder. There are no recreation areas, no sunlight, no air circulation. And once you're inside, you don't come out. When Bukele inaugurated the prison in early 2023, he made it a public event. A slick video showed shirtless inmates, heads down, hands tied, being marched into the compound. Thousands of them, in perfect rows, skinny, tattooed, silent. The message was clear. Order had arrived. To his supporters, this was the image they had waited for. Justice after decades of chaos. To his critics, it was dystopian, a country turning incarceration into a spectacle. But for Bukele, that was the point. He wasn't just building a prison. He was building a brand of total control. The facility has capacity for 40,000 inmates. That makes it one of the largest prisons on earth. And it's only the centerpiece of a larger system. Across the country, hundreds of detention centers are overflowing. Trials are suspended. Many detainees haven't been formally charged. Some have died in custody, allegedly from torture, malnutrition, or denial of medical care. But again, public opinion remains overwhelmingly in favor. For Salvadorans who lived in fear for decades, Syria is not a prison. It's a symbol of freedom, freedom from gangs, freedom from fear, even if it means putting due process in a coffin. Let's start with the headline figure, the murder rate. In 2015, El Salvador recorded over 6,600 homicides, an average of 18 murders per day. By 2023, that number had dropped by over 90%. Today, El Salvador ranks among the safest countries in Latin America, with fewer murders per capita than Colombia, Mexico, or Brazil. In 2022, there were 495 homicides. In 2023, fewer than 200. Entire weeks pass without a single murder, something unheard of just a few years ago. But it doesn't stop at homicides. Extortion, down. Armed robberies, down. Carjackings, gang violence, kidnappings, all way down. Police claim they've dismantled dozens of criminal cells and cleared entire regions of gang activity. In neighborhoods once controlled by MS-13 and Barrio 18, people now open shops, go for walks, and send their kids to school without fear. Tourism is up. Investment is returning. Public trust is growing. President Bukele points to these numbers as proof that his policies work. And for many Salvadorans, they do. But the numbers also reveal something darker. Since 2022, over 75,000 people have been arrested. That's over 1% of the entire population. At the peak of arrests, police were detaining up to 1,600 people per day. Many have been imprisoned without formal charges. Legal groups estimate that thousands of innocent people remain behind bars. Some simply disappeared into the system. There have also been at least 150 confirmed deaths in custody. Some from torture, others from untreated illness. And yet, the support continues. Polls show Bukele with approval ratings above 90%, the highest in the Western Hemisphere. He's especially popular among the poor, those who suffered most under gang control. In many cases, people say they're willing to accept false arrests and human rights violations as long as the gangs are gone. To them, fear of the state is better than fear of criminals. And that's what makes this model so complicated, because by traditional metrics, it's working. But at what point does a country become so secure that it stops being free? Today, El Salvador is calm. Neighborhoods once ruled by gangs are now quiet. Extortion is down. Murders are rare. Tourists are returning. Businesses are opening. On paper, it looks like a miracle. In practice, it feels like a fortress. Because beneath the silence, there are questions. Questions about freedom, power, and what comes next. Tens of thousands remain in prison, many without trials. Entire families wait months, even years for answers. The judicial system has been hollowed out. The media is restricted. The president controls nearly every branch of government. And what happens when the gang threat is truly gone? Does the emergency end? Do the prisons release the innocent? Does democracy return? No one knows, because in El Salvador, security has become the new ideology. It's not just a policy, it's a political identity. And Bukele has built a brand on it. In 2024, he's running for re-election, even though the Constitution forbids it. Even though democratic norms are eroding. Even though power is consolidating faster than ever. And most Salvadorans support him. Because for the first time in their lives, they feel safe. Safety is addictive, especially when it follows decades of trauma. But safety without accountability can become something else. A prison may protect you from danger, but it also has walls. And once those walls are up, it's not always easy to tell who's inside and who's out. The story of El Salvador is far from over. And what looks like a miracle today may become a warning tomorrow. The story of El Salvador is far from over, and what looks like a miracle today may become a warning tomorrow. If you want to see more stories like this, of countries at the edge of power reshaping nations, subscribe to the channel. We dig deeper than the headlines. And what we find isn't always comfortable. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.